Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by Mr. Boxing Ego. And I do tend to like to review his videos here and there. And the main reason why that is, once again, is because usually, even though Mr. Ego can bring up certain logical points of view, I think that a lot of the times, unfortunately, at least for him, he lets his emotions usually get in the way, at least when it comes to certain fighters that he may like or dislike. And if you're supposed to be a logical and objective commentator, your main points are not supposed to be on who you like and dislike. And unfortunately, I think that for Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV and Boxing Ego and the majority of these LDBC and new media channels, but not just them, but also a certain amount of other sports commentators as well, most people usually let their feelings get involved a little bit too much rather than their logic and rationale. But anyways, in this video, I thought that it would be very particularly interesting because Mr. Boxing Ego is going to bring up certain Canelo Alvarez fans criticizing Mr. Shakur Stevenson for his most recent performance. Now, I did think that Shakur Stevenson's most recent performance against Robson Conceição, or Conceição, however you pronounce his name, I did think that it was a very, very good performance. There were certain things that I thought that he could have done better, but all in all, I did think that it was a very, very decently great performance. I also thought that Canelo Alvarez's performance against Gennady Golovkin was a decently great performance. I would not say that it was the best performance that I've ever seen in his career, but once again, considering the circumstances of Canelo coming off of an 8 rounds to 4 loss against Dimitri Bivol, and on top of that, him heading into a trilogy with a fighter that he had basically had life and death fights with in those two prior fights. Yes, he may have been 40 years old, but more than likely Canelo Alvarez was going to be a little bit nervous when it came down to it. And there's also a possibility that Canelo may have carried Gennady Golovkin a little bit because the way that they kind of set that up, in my opinion, it seemed like they wanted to make the fight a lot closer than what it actually was. It may also be very possible that Canelo Alvarez was told not to knock out Gennady Golovkin. There's a certain amount of people that believe that Errol Spence Jr., when it comes down, it was told the same, instructions against Mikey Garcia. Now, of course, that is a hypothetical. Canelo Alvarez, maybe all in all, just could have been nervous enough, or maybe all in all, not in the right, set of mind to where he was not able to knock out Gennady Golovkin. Either way, whatever it may be, I didn't really think all in all that it was that big of a deal. Gennady Golovkin and Canelo have had very, very tough fights previously, and Canelo looked the best in that trilogy, in my opinion, than what he did in any of the other fights, because it pretty much was a complete shutout. But it is what it is. But anyways, as we all know, Mr. Ego did not like Canelo Alvarez's performance because he said apparently that he looked bad, and we all know that Mr. Ego is always going to try to tear down Mr. Canelo Alvarez because he does not like him. And then so there was a certain amount of Canelo Alvarez fans in return that criticized Mr. Shakur Stevenson for not being able to stop Mr. Robson Conceição. Now, Shakur Stevenson is not a guy that, once again, is going to stop a lot of elite opponents, or, he's not going to stop every single one of his opponents. He just doesn't have that type of A-grade power. But Mr. Ego, all in all, is going to be talking about that. I thought it would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a little bit of a comparison between Mr. Canelo Alvarez and Shakur Stevenson, and also to talk about both of their careers, and also the fact how Mr. Ego, all in all, is going to handle this situation and clearly does not like Mr. Canelo Alvarez. But anyways, let's get into the video. Let's see what he has to say.
It's funny. I see some Canelo Man fans nitpicking Shakur Stevenson's domination win over Robson Conceição, where he destroyed Robson Conceição. Yet there's no criticism for Canelo Alvarez, who handpicked a 40-year-old.
Yeah, no, guys, I've already told people this, and I've said this 100 times. The only people that are saying that Canelo Alvarez handpicked Gennady Golovkin are either A, Gennady Golovkin fans that were really hoping that Gennady Golovkin was going to win the trilogy, or B, they were guys like Mr. Ego who were hoping that there was going to be a little bit more competitiveness in the fight, or that Canelo was going to look bad when it came down to it. Keep in mind, these are the same guys that wanted to see Gennady Golovkin versus Jamal Charlo at this point in time in his career. They also wanted to see Gennady Golovkin versus Demetrius Bubo Andrade. But then as soon as Canelo fought him, Gennady Golovkin is completely washed up. And listen, I get it. if you're still going to be in boxing, even if you're 40 some years of age, and if you have belts, you are going to have to repeatedly face some of the top contenders. But I just find that particularly interesting, the narratives that they like to pull out of their ass when it comes down to it, depending on which fighter fights them first. But anyway.
Golovkin, who'd been looking worn, brought him up 8 pounds and didn't look dominant down the stretch. Let's talk about it.
I don't understand why people keep making this point to where he brought him up 8 pounds. I really don't understand this point. Does Mr. Ego bitch, moan, and complain about Floyd Mayweather Jr. bringing Juan Manuel Marquez up 2 weight divisions? Of course, Floyd Mayweather Jr. was not really a natural welterweight. He's probably more of a natural 140 pounder. But that's kind of the point that I'm making about Canelo Alvarez as well. Canelo's not a natural, he's not really even a natural 168 pounder. And Gennady Golovkin and Canelo, they're pretty much the same size. It's not like Canelo Alvarez is that much bigger, if really bigger at all, than Gennady Golovkin. So I really don't understand how that point has any fruition. I think all in all that if you were to maybe make that point with somebody else, maybe with like Vasily Lomachenko against Guillermo Rigondeaux, or maybe all in all against Errol Spence Jr. and Mikey Garcia, that point would make a little bit more sense. But in my opinion, the point doesn't really make much sense with Canelo and Gennady because they've all pretty much been the same size for their whole entire career. Just is what it is. Anyway.
What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Now, Shakur Stevenson destroyed yet another foe. This one was a gold medalist who I don't even want to say arguably because he really beat Oscar Valdez. And had it not been for a hometown robbery and boxing politics, and more of the ace.
Well, I agree in my view that Robson Conceição probably should have won the fight. I believe that I scored a 7 rounds to 5 for Mr. Robson Conceição when he fought Oscar Valdez. But it's interesting. You notice that a certain amount of these guys, when they need to score a fight correctly, they have a decently perfect scorecard. But then when it comes to certain fighters that they like that more than likely probably should have lost, like Deontay Wilder against Tyson Fury in the first fight, they say, oh, well, you know what? I don't have a problem with the draw. Or when it comes to Jamal Charlo versus Brian Castano, oh, well, that was really a fight that couldn't win either way. I just find that particularly interesting. And listen, you have the right to your own opinion, but I know all in all when overall they're looking at things from a very much biased perspective.
Died and all that type of stuff. Then if this was like a fair competition, which we know boxing has some corruption and dirty, underhanded tactics and things like that, Robson Conceição definitely would have beaten Valdez that night. Valdez's face did not look good at the end of the fight, which I don't just go off of, the status of somebody's face because they could have scar tissue or a headbutt or.
I would agree. And that's a very good statement all in all that Mr. Ego just said, because you can't rely the results on a fight just how someone's face looks. Gennady Golovkin's face looked a little bit more marked up than what Canelo Alvarez's did in the first fight. But all in all, I think that, at least if you're a logical and objective commentator, you more than likely, knew what you were watching, and you probably had Gennady Golovkin just slightly winning that fight just as I did. Just is what it is. So you can't always rely on someone's face.
Anything. But sometimes the status of one's face does indicate, and just like CompuBox. You can't live and die by CompuBox, but sometimes
I agree with that as well.
The CompuBox stats are dead on. Like if somebody's connect percentage is 59% and then the other person's is 12, and then it was a blowout, then those CompuBox numbers may be accurate. So I've seen this, a growing hate for Shakur Stevenson, and I see it ironically from none other than some of the Canelo Man fans, right? And you could tell.
Well, I don't think that it's really super duper ironic, Mr. Eagle, but you're going to have a certain amount of people in your comment section to where they hear you talk shit about Canelo Alvarez a great amount, or they hear you talk shit about Tyson Fury, or all in all, other fighters. So you're going to have certain Caucasian fans and Latino fans that are going to go after the black fighters that you tend to cheer for. All right. And that's probably the same reason, all in all, why you go after Canelo or Tyson Fury, because you've noticed, at least in your mind, that old media and some of these other boxing fans have went after black fighters that you have liked. So in return, you said, well, let me criticize overall these guys on an even playing field. But that's not how an objective and logical commentator thinks. And don't get me wrong, Sometimes it is necessary overall to put out the same energy that we are receiving. Sometimes it is necessary. But if you're going to be an objective and logical commentator, you can't take a look at things and basically say, oh, well, I'm going to do this because overall this is what they did to me. That's not overall what someone objective does, at least when we're talking about a conversation.
Because there's when I go to block some of these people on social media, I see a bunch of Canelo posts, or they could have Canelo in their picture profile, things like that. And when I go to box block, see people tell on themselves on the internet, because when you go to block somebody, you could get a good overview of what their true interests are. Like, we're all supposed to be boxing fans, but if the only thing you're reposting is Canelo posts and tweets and things like that, or the only videos you're liking and only activity on YouTube is Canelo videos, then I think it's safe to say that's what you're here for. You're in boxing, you're a man fan. So
Well, I would agree with that, Mr. Ego, when it comes down to it. I don't disagree with what you stated, but I don't think that you have the right to call anyone a man fan. And I've already stated this a multitude of times. You should have seen the way that this dude was defending Deontay Wilder. He defended Deontay Wilder the way that Shannon Sharp defends LeBron James. He was defending him overall like a loyal housewife defends her husband. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. So let's not call anyone a man fan when we all definitely know that you're a man fan of Deontay Wilder, Errol Spence Jr., when it comes down to it, more than likely Jermell Charlo, and most black American fighters. And you have the right to cheer for whoever you're going to cheer for. But don't be, you really don't have the right to call anyone else a man fan, because we all know when things overall get that way that you're going to be just as much of a man fan as any of those ridiculous Canelo Alvarez fans.
ironically, like I said in my tweet, make sure you guys follow me at Boxing Ego. I just find it funny because Shakur Stevenson took a gold medalist who was definitely good. Another thing some people don't know, Robson Conceição beat Vasily Lomachenko in the amateurs.
Yes, and one of the biggest robberies of all time, which is not a lot of people do not do the research when it came down to it. Go ahead and watch that fight. That fight was one of the worst overall robberies of all time in either amateur or overall professional boxing, at least from what I remember. So there's another example of certain people I don't know getting information where they really don't know what the hell they're talking about, or to where they have no context. And it's so interesting because these guys always say that Lomachenko, what he did in the amateurs, that it really doesn't matter. But then when overall they want to, whenever they want it to matter, all of a sudden they bring up the amateur record. Listen, at the end of the day, with me, I really don't give a shit what you did in the amateurs. But Vasily Lomachenko, when it comes down to it, he is a guy that clearly is an elite fighter. And I think that had Robson Conceição clearly beat him in the amateurs, I think that maybe that is something to mention. Because I did mention it with Brian Gastano overall against Jermell Charlo when he beat Errol Spence Jr., I believe, in the amateurs. And I believe also maybe Sean Porter when it came down to it. So it's not necessarily always a bad point, but you can't cherry pick when that point works for you and when it doesn't.
Right before he turned pro. And then the next day they changed it for some reason. So more politics.
They changed it all in all because it was one of the worst robberies of all time. That's the reason why they changed it. But you're not going to put that out there. Anyway.
So this is a guy who's been riddled with politics throughout his career, both in the Lomachenko amateur win, probably trying to preserve Lomachenko's in the Lomachenko amateur win, probably trying to preserve Lomachenko's alleged 396-1 record, and also with the Oscar Valdez fight, where it was in Oscar Valdez's backyard, and he really won that fight as well.
Well, I agree that he won the Oscar Valdez fight, but he didn't win the Vasily Lomachenko fight. That's really you talking about shit that you're not properly informed on, or you're being disingenuous.
The great thing about what Shakur Stevenson did is at home, where there's more pressure, you see old teachers, old classmates, people from your city, even haters probably, some people that don't want to see Shakur shine from the city might have come out, so you got to battle and keep your nerves under control and in check in these situations. But the great thing about Shakur Stevenson's performance is, although there wasn't a knockout, which for whatever reason that was the um, anticipation. That's the like some of the criticism I was seeing.
Well, let's be real, Mr. Eagle. If you're going to criticize Canelo Alvarez and certain other fighters on the know for small, stupid shit like not getting the knockout when they came off of an 8 rounds to 4 loss over a fighter that has never been knocked out or even knocked down in his whole entire amateur or professional boxing career, people are going to come back at you and they're going to criticize your fighters because they realize that you're full of shit. Now, don't get me wrong. In my opinion, that's not the logical or objective thing to do. But the energy that you put out sometimes is the energy that you're going to get straight back.
He left nothing to the imagination, and there was no doubt, like Gwen Stefani, as far as who won. However,
Yeah, no shit. There also was no doubt about who won between the Canelo and Gennady Golovkin fight. But apparently you were not happy with that performance because, in your view, Canelo should have gotten the knockout. Now, one could make the argument that, well, Gennady Golovkin was 40 something years old. Canelo had already been used to him a little bit when it came down to it. And Shakur, all in all, he was coming in against an opponent that he had never fought before. And Shakur Stevenson is not usually a knockout artist. You could make that point, but one could also make the point that if Canelo was going to get criticism because he didn't knock out a fighter that he had 2 very tough fights with in the past when it came down to it, and on top of that, he was coming off of a very decently dominant loss, and it was a fighter that he had 2 life or death fights with. Shouldn't Shakur, all in all, if you're going to state that, Shakur is on, an above level of Canelo, and maybe Mr. Ego is not stating that, but I have heard a certain amount of other channels like Dante state that overall, if you're going to criticize Canelo, and if you believe that Shakur is on the top 10 pound for pound list, and you must partially believe that, at least all in all, in your view, that at least the narrative that you're trying to push is that Shakur, all in all, that he could be better than Canelo because you've stated a multitude of times that Shakur is top 10 and that Canelo does not even deserve to be there. So if Canelo is going to get criticism for not knocking out a Gennady Golovkin, shouldn't Shakur Stevenson, overall get a little bit of criticism because he was not even able to knock out pretty much a B or C class fighter? I'll give him a B because I thought he won over Oscar Valdez, but Robson Conceição is never going to be an A-grade fighter.
you have Canelo, and this is why I'm saying it's ironic that Canelo man fans of all fans, since Canelo recently fought, and he fought a 40-year-old, brought him up to a preferred weight of his, where Golovkin.
I don't know why the hell people keep bringing this up. Well, Mr. Shakur Stevenson missed weight, so shouldn't he overall get criticism for that? Like, this shit just doesn't make any goddamn sense. I've never heard this criticism overall before, unless we're talking about a fighter that maybe brought up a fighter, from 2 separate weight classes. Canelo and Gennady Golovkin are the same exact size, if Gennady Golovkin is not even a little bit bigger. Anyway, these are the same guys that were apparently criticizing Vasily Lomachenko for losing to Tiafimo because they said, oh, well, he wasn't really that much smaller. He was used to fighting at 135 during the amateurs. So where was that excuse for Vasily Lomachenko? And once again, don't get me wrong. There should not be an excuse, all in all, depending on who your favorite fighters are. You need to treat everyone overall with somewhat of the same standards. But this is why I say these channels cannot be relied upon.
Traveled 8 pounds north to a new division where he had not proven anything, where he wasn't a champion any longer. And Canelo, on the other hand, was undisputed in that division, plus had 2 fights at 175. So the last people in boxing that should be commenting on Shakur Stevenson's performance in the form of nitpicking should be a Canelo diehard radical.
Well, no, when it comes down to it, because once again, if you're going to criticize Mr. Canelo Alvarez for not knocking out an opponent that no one has been able to knock out ever before, shouldn't you criticize Shakur Stevenson for not being able to stop Mr. Robson Conceição? You were just stating on the other day, and I may overall release this video because I never did, but I reviewed a video by him the other day to where he was stating, well, all in all, had Floyd Mayweather been in a trilogy with Marcos Maidana, wouldn't he overall have stopped him? Like, what are you talking about? Not every trilogy ends up overall in a stoppage. Even if we take a look at Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez, none of them knocked each other out until the 4th fight. So it just is what it is. Does that mean that Manny Pacquiao, all in all, is not a great fighter? Like, that just doesn't make any sense.
Man fan, because Canelo, despite all these things in his favor, he didn't look sensational for the Triple G 12 rounds.
I
Like,
don't understand how he didn't look sensational when he completely shut out Gennady Triple G Golovkin. Now, if you want to state that it was not the most sensational performance of his career, or that he looked better in some of his most previous fights, yeah, that would be accurate to say. But to say that Canelo did not look good or did not look sensational, like, I really don't know what the hell these guys are talking about. I mean, that would be like saying Shakur Stevenson didn't look sensational against, like, Robson Conceição. Like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Like, sure, Shakur Stevenson didn't get the knockout against Robson Conceição, but he pretty much won every round. Now, I would say that Shakur Stevenson probably looked a little bit more dominant against Robson Conceição than what Canelo did against Gennady, but once again, that's to be expected. You're talking about a fighter that still is probably an A-minus fighter at this point in time in his career in Gennady Golovkin, a fighter that gave Canelo two very, very rough and harsh fights overall before, and on top of that, Canelo was coming off of a loss. So, I mean, once again, let's give Canelo Alvarez at least a little bit of a break for that. I was not expecting overall the most tremendous performance of his career.
look completely gassed. Shakur Stevenson's bullying the dude, and he didn't look like he was out of shape. And this is a guy who missed weight. Let's be real. He missed weight before the Robson Conceição fight. So I thought Shakur did fine. Um, I did talk about the prospect of, stepping on the gas and maybe trying to get the knockout or finding new ways to, you know, produce that.
Well, he tried. It's just all in all that he couldn't get it. And it's not all in all, that I blame 100% Shakur Stevenson for that. He just doesn't have the power. It's not that he has no power. It's just that he doesn't have A-grade power. And that's going to be very interesting to see where Shakur Stevenson goes from here. Because I'm going to be very interested to see especially how he handles some of those pressuring styles. If he's going to be able to keep someone like a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Vasily Lomachenko off of him. And if he moves up, maybe someone all in all like a Ryan Garcia or someone else, because that's going to be very interesting. Someone all in all told me in my comment section, I believe it was yesterday, where they said that Shakur Stevenson reminds them of a Sugar Shane Mosley, to where all in all he looked very, very good at 135, but then when he started moving up, he started losing some of his bigger fights. What Shakur Stevenson reminds me of is that he reminds me of a smaller version of Terrence Bud Crawford. He's probably faster, of course, because he's lighter than Terrence Bud Crawford, but he does not have the same A-grade punching power as what a Terrence Bud Crawford has. So I don't really necessarily know who to compare him to other than that. Maybe if you wanted to, a Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker, just not quite as good defensively at the current moment in time, but we'll have to see all in all what happens. But Sugar Shane Mosley, all in all, actually, if you remember him, and I do understand the comparison, he was just trying to say all in all that he believes that Shakur will be the next Sugar Shane Mosley in terms of accomplishments. I think that Shakur may even have a higher potential than what a Sugar Shane Mosley had. Because Sugar Shane Mosley was known for blowing a lot of the bigger fights in his career. Now, will Shakur Stevenson do that? Who knows? There's going to be a lot of level of competition there. Devin Haney, Gervonta Tank Davis, Vasily Lomachenko, any one of those fights are potentially losable. But Shakur Stevenson is very, very talented. But I am going to be interested to see how his power will translate. But one thing I'll also say about Sugar Shane Mosley, he was a little bit too repetitive sometimes in his offensive attacks. And I always thought that he could be a little bit better defensively. In my view, that's a big part of the reason why he lost some of the bigger fights in his career, like against Floyd Mayweather Jr. and also Miguel Cotto when it came down to it a little bit later on. But Sugar Shane Mosley also had massive, massive power. Like, Sugar Shane Mosley was one of the hardest hitters that I can remember from the 2000s. No doubt about it. Sugar Shane Mosley now, of course, he was a little bit on the special juice. He was caught on steroids at one point in time, but all in all, once again, that's not really something that, it deserves a little bit of criticism, but because I can't really tell how many of these fighters are actually on steroids and which ones aren't, I won't overall go overboard with the criticism. But Sugar Shane Mosley was always known for massive, massive power, even when he was moving up in the weight divisions. Shakur, I'm just not sure if he has that same type of punching power. But when certain people do move up the weight divisions, of course, because they add more weight, if he's going to be able to handle it, Shakur Stevenson, he may gain more power, but we'll see what happens.
But I'm qualified to give that kind of criticism or whatever you want to call it because I give you a fair and balanced.
No, you don't. Sorry, sir, but no, you did not, all in all, give a fair and balanced quality of criticism. Because we all know when it comes to the majority of black American fighters, you are not, all in all, going to treat them objectively and fairly. All in all, what you're going to do is you're going to treat the black American fighters with a silver spoon, all in all, and basically treat them with kitty gloves, even if they do not have an impressive performance. And when it comes to Canelo or Tyson Fury, you're going to try to be as harsh as possible.
Assessment of the fight. I'm giving a lot of praise where the praise is due. You know, the
No, you're not.
ring IQ, the jab, the hooks, straight shots, the left hand was there, the defense. You know, I'm not just complaining. See, the difference between like the Canelo Man fans, the first thing they'll say is Shakur, he put me to sleep and I was bored and Shakur should.
Well, that's great, Mr. Boxing Ego. I understand your point, but let's also be real, sir. When it came down to Mr. Canelo Alvarez, you were basically stating on the know that, oh, well, if Canelo does this, it's not going to look good. If Canelo does this, it's not going to look good. And you're entitled to your opinion. But it was very clear that, all in all, that you were not going to be happy no matter what Canelo Alvarez did. Because according to you, Canelo Alvarez looked bad because he was not able to knock out Gennady Golovkin. But then in another video that I tended to review, you stated all in all that if he knocks out Gennady Golovkin, that isn't going to look good because then it'll look like Gennady Golovkin was washed up. So what were you really going to be happy with when it came down to the Canelo Alvarez performance? It was very obvious that you were not going to be happy as long as Canelo Alvarez won that fight.
Did this and da 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 da. And it's funny because, again, out of all fans in boxing, the Canelo Man fans, I didn't see this type of criticism for Canelo, who fought a silver medalist, not a gold medalist like Shakur did last night. And
Right, but come on, are we really going to compare Robson Conceição versus Gennady Golovkin? Like, come on, let's not be disingenuous here, Mr. Boxing Ego. Once again, all of a sudden the amateurs matter. And listen, in my opinion, don't get me wrong, the amateurs are, you can bring them up here and there, but I don't really give a shit about what you did in the amateurs. I care about what you do in professional boxing. Robson Conceição is not an A-level fighter. He is never going to be an A-level fighter. If you put him in there with any other A-grade fighters, he is never going to win those big fights. Never. He's a decent fighter. He is not a great fighter. Period. Bottom line. And this dude is really going to try to make the point of, all in all, that, Robson Conceição was actually a better and tougher opponent than Gennady Golovkin. Like, get the fuck out of here. And apparently you're supposed to be an objective and logical commentator. Like, come on, dude. That's just an idiotic point.
really got hurt and struggled in the stretch. Plus, you fought this guy 24 rounds previously. You had fights 1 and 2, and you.
Right, but once again, both of those fights were extraordinarily tough, Mr. Boxing Ego. Not every trilogy is going to end up the same. When we take a look at Roberto Duran versus Sugar Ray Leonard in that trilogy, that was a trilogy that was very decently competitive. None of those fights ended up in a stoppage. Well, actually, that's not true. The second fight ended up in a stoppage, but that was because Roberto Duran quit. He could have went on, but he was so frustrated because he could not figure out Sugar Ray Leonard in that fight. And there's also rumors that he was not in good shape, so he quit that one. But when we take a look at Manny Pacquiao versus Marquez, their first 3 fights, there was no stoppages. All right, so not every overall trilogy ends up in a stoppage. And once again, you have to give Canelo a little bit of breathing room here. You have to give him a little bit of a break because you're talking about a fighter that was coming off of a dominant loss. Once again, if Deontay Wilder, when it comes down to it, after this ass whooping over Tyson Fury, if he ends up not looking so good against Robert Elenius, do you think that Mr. Boxing Ego is going to claim that, oh, well, Deontay Wilder looked like shit? No, no, of course not. But he does not like Canelo. So he is going to try to break him down at every turn.
Sparred with him. To my knowledge, Shakur Stevenson and Robson Conceição had no real fight history together, and Shakur Stevenson, by the second, third round, had him totally figured out to the point where in the first 2 rounds he had some energy. Then it looked like his legs were gone and he looked like a shot fighter, like he had no energy. And this was not the Conceição Styles make fights that fought Oscar Valdez. He just looked horrible down the stretch.
Well, no, it was the same when that fought Oscar Valdez. It's just that Robson Conceição, I think, was able to catch Oscar Valdez more than likely and not his best point. And on top of that, who knows? Robson Conceição, he's not a bad boxer. He's just not an elite boxer. And I think that his type of style, he'll give problems to certain fighters, maybe like an Oscar Valdez. all in all, who was shorter than him, and all in all, more than likely is going to try to come in and try to out pressure him. But against certain fighters, let's say, if he were to face a Vasily Lomachenko or a Devin Haney or any one of those fighters, he's not going to beat any of those fighters.
So that's really a testament to the ability and agility of Shakur Stevenson. So I had to point out this double standard, and I find it very, very funny that
Well, all in all, it's not just a double standard for Mr. Canelo Alvarez fans, Mr. Ego. It's also a double standard from you. Because once again, you are not going to be happy with whatever Canelo Alvarez did.
Canelo man fans, of all fans in boxing recently, have so much to critique and nitpick. Meanwhile, their savior, Canelo Alvarez, he fought a 40-year-old, and all the things that I said moved him up in weight. You had experience with this particular person, and you didn't drop or stop him. Shakur at least got one knockdown.
Right, against a B or C class fighter. Like, what the fuck are we really talking about right now? Like, come on. This guy is actually really trying to make the point that Robson Conceição was a more difficult opponent for overall Shakur Stevenson than what Gennady Golovkin was for Canelo Alvarez. Like, what are we really talking about? Gennady Golovkin, all in all, he is a fighter that has never been knocked down, never been knocked out either in his amateur or professional career. Gennady Golovkin at one point in time was a top 10 pound per pound fighter. You're trying to bring up these points that make no sense whatsoever.
Canelo had all this experience with this guy and never even hurt him. What are we talking about?
No, he actually did hurt him a multitude of times, but that's not overall the point that you're going to try to bring up because, once again, you're trying to make Canelo Alvarez look as bad as possible. And you've done over a dozen videos on trying to make Canelo Alvarez look as bad as possible with your most recent videos.
We got to get boxing conversations back to where they should be. And follow my channel. We're on the road to 300.
To where they should be. Where is that? Criticizing overall certain fighters that you don't like, but all in all, treating the fighters that you love with a silver spoon. There's already way more than enough people in the sport of boxing that do that shit. Anyway.
Okay, God willing, we'll get there. SLC, subscribe, like, and comment. I'm the best in the business, but y'all knew that and I'm out. Congrats to Shakur Stevenson. Introducing.
But anyways, that's really about it. I just thought that I would talk about that. Once again, this shows that Mr. Ego is not to be relied upon. He talks about a double standard, but he also holds a double standard for certain fighters that he does not like. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's really about it for this video. But I am going to be very interested to see what ends up happening next with both of these fighters' careers, especially Shakur Stevenson, because I'm going to be very interested to see what happens at 135. But it's very exciting to watch him. He is an all-around great talent, as well as Canelo Alvarez. It's going to be very interesting to see where he goes from here as well. Going to be very interesting. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.